Has a doctor ever told you that your symptoms are just all in your head? It can feel frustrating, dismissive, and rightfully so. You feel invalidated, like they think that your symptoms aren't even real. But what if I told you that there's a surprising twist to that statement? Now, while it's not all in your head, the connection between your brain and your body is a powerful one, and it plays a bigger role in your dysfunction than you may think. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into tenet of recovery number 1, the mind-body connection. We'll try to get a better understanding of the role that pain, stress, and anxiety, and your body's fight or flight response mechanism has in keeping your pelvic floor stuck in a state of overdrive. You're not going to want to miss the information in this video, so stick around and let's get into it. Disclaimer time, I'm not a doc, not a PT, just a wannabe armchair expert with Wi-Fi and way too much personal experience. Just because I've been through it doesn't make me a guru. Now, to truly understand why pelvic floor dysfunction isn't just all in your head, but also deeply connected to how your body responds to stress and anxiety, we need to look at the nervous system a little bit. Your nervous system is the bridge between your brain and your body. And when your nervous system is stuck in overdrive, it can have a profound impact on your pelvic floor and your pelvic floor health. Now, the first thing I want to say is you are not crazy. Your body is really complicated and your nervous system is even more complex. Specifically, the nervous system is your body's command center, and it's divided into 2 main parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Now, the central nervous system includes your brain and spinal cord and are the main pathways that process higher order information, things like memory and emotions and control of reflexes. The peripheral nervous system, on the other hand, connects the central nervous system to the rest of the body through neurons. Motor neurons, which send signals out to the body, and sensory neurons, which sense information and bring them back into the central nervous system and ultimately the brain. Now, the peripheral nervous system has 2 distinct branches. The somatic system, which handles voluntary movements, things like walking and talking and lifting your arm, and the autonomic system, which controls involuntary processes, things like your heartbeat and digestion, and namely your smooth muscles. These smooth muscles include digestive organ function, like in the intestines and the stomach, as well as urogenital and sexual organs like the bladder and the penis. The autonomic nervous system splits further into 2 other distinct categories, which we've talked about before on this channel. The sympathetic division, which is your fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic division, which is your rest and digest response. Now, these 2 are critical because stress often pushes the body into a sympathetic state. And it's this sympathetic state that has a profound impact on your pelvic floor muscle tone. It can create muscle guarding, which creates nerve compression, which creates pain. And that pain sends information back to your brain and says, whoa, something's wrong here. Now that we have a little bit better understanding of the structure of the nervous system, let's take a closer look at how autonomic nervous system dysfunction plays a key role in pelvic floor disorders. Many studies have increasingly highlighted the connection between sympathetic overactivity and conditions like chronic pelvic pain, erectile dysfunction, and more. We're going to dive into studies right now to better understand these relationships. Now, this first one is an article from the Grand Journal of Urology titled The Effects of the Autonomic Nervous System on Urogenital Disorders. It's honestly the most comprehensive of the 5 that I'll discuss today and is certainly worth reading on your own. Of course, all links will be included in the pinned comment. Now, this is a systematic, externally peer-reviewed article of 39 key studies relating urogenital disorders to evidence of some form of autonomic nervous system dysfunction. Basically, a study of studies of varying types, including some cohort studies of both men and women where urogenital disorders had some causal link to autonomic dysregulation. Now, while the majority of these studies are focused on females and menstrual cycles, estrogen production, heck, even the effects of smoking on those, there are some studies that also looked at pelvic pain for both men and women with overactive bladder, pelvic pain, for men, erectile dysfunction, and premature ejaculation. One study found that autonomic nervous system dysfunction exists in men with chronic prostatitis and chronic pelvic pain syndrome. They found things related to heart rate variability, similar to fibromyalgia, And another study supported these findings that ANS dysfunction may be a key mechanism in the development of chronic pelvic pain syndrome and chronic non-bacterial prostatitis. Most interesting, 3 of the studies note this. The parasympathetic nervous system causes penile arterial dilation and relaxation of the smooth muscles of the corpora cavernosa. Pelvic diseases like erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, benign prostatic hyperplasia, incontinence, overactive bladder, pelvic pain, colorectal motility disorders seem to have a connection with each other, possibly via the ANS network. The deterioration of the function of a structure also leads to the inevitable impairment of the adjacent structures. Erectile dysfunction is characterized by ANS imbalance dysfunction and SNS hyperactivity. In normal conditions, ejaculation is maintained by the sympathetic nervous system. However, premature ejaculation is also associated with sympathetic nervous system hyperactivity like erectile dysfunction. And so the conclusion is basically, we know that there's involvement. There needs to be more research. We can't exclude autonomic nervous system dysfunction because we find dysfunction in most of these case studies. Now, whether the dysfunction is a result or a cause of all of these disorders is to be determined. Here's a review article from the World Journal of Men's Health that talks about chronic prostatitis and chronic pelvic pain syndrome. Now, despite its frequency, while the exact causes of CP and CPPS remain elusive, the article goes on to say, which leads to challenges in effective management, of course, recent research highlights a potential link between chronic pelvic pain and dysfunctions with the autonomic nervous system. In patients with CP and CPPS, these disruptions have been observed in the sensory nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, and the central nervous system. With the sensory nervous system, neuroinflammation, heightened sensitivity of sensory nerves can lead to ongoing inflammation and pain in the pelvic region. In the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, alterations may impact cardiovascular and reproductive health, potentially leading to the development of prostatitis. In the central nervous system, central sensitization syndrome can lower pain thresholds, which increase the perception of pelvic pain in CP and CPPS cases. Understanding the role of the autonomic nervous system in chronic pelvic pain offers new avenues for treatment by targeting the specific neurological pathways and receptors involved. Therapies can be developed to address the root causes of the syndrome, potentially improving patient outcomes and reducing recurrence rates. In summary, the dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system plays a critical role in the onset and progression of chronic prostatitis and chronic pelvic pain syndrome. Recognizing and addressing these neurological factors is essential for developing effective treatments and enhancing the quality of life for those affected. This next one is a case series and literature review from PubMed, which also links sympathetic nervous system activity to overactive bladder syndrome and bladder pain syndrome. And I'll just read directly from the study here. As there is substantive evidence for cross-organ sensitization in the pelvis can lead to comorbidity of genitourinary and gastrointestinal dysfunctions, how sympathetic dysfunction may play a role in a number of comorbid chronic pain syndromes. In the conclusion at the end, abnormalities in autonomic sympathetic activity have been demonstrated in chronic bladder pain, and this has been described both at clinical and experimental level. Although several studies suggest a link between sympathetic overactivity and chronic bladder pain, additional research is necessary to understand the underlying mechanisms. The confirmation of such hypothesis may help our understanding of how abnormalities in autonomic function may contribute to the pathophysiology of a number of chronic pelvic pain disorders. And this last one from PubMed is originally published in the Journal of Urology, and it basically investigated the role of the autonomic nervous system in men with chronic pelvic pain syndrome. They assessed 22 men with CPPS and 20 healthy controls, measuring their blood pressure, heart rate variability, and sympathetic skin responses. The findings revealed that men with CPPS exhibited higher mean blood pressure readings in both supine and standing position compared to the controls. And additionally, when transitioning from lying down to standing, the control group showed an increase in low frequency power, which is indicative of sympathetic activity, while the CPPS group experienced a decrease. So these results suggest altered autonomic nervous system responses in men with CPPS, highlighting the potential for therapies targeting autonomic regulation to manage this condition. In other words, if you can manage your autonomic regulation, you can reduce your symptoms of chronic pelvic pain. Okay, so we've looked at these different articles and studies, and all of them have a common thread. While causations are not clearly interpreted, likely because they vary for each person, the common denominator is autonomic dysfunction, aka sympathetic overactivity. Again, whether there was sympathetic overactivity beforehand, contributing to the symptoms, or it was the overactivity causing the symptoms itself, addressing the overactivity through various methods is suggested or even proven in some of these cases to improve your symptoms. My personal theory is that there is not one cause for PFD. Rather, it's a combination of many things. For me personally, it was a sedentary lifestyle that led to musculoskeletal imbalances, followed by repetitive microtrauma from sitting, irritating the muscles in my sacrum, combined with my history of straining from years of IBS that I've had as a kid, combined with tons of chronic stress post-COVID, and voila, I had PFD. But for others, it's a combination of some of these factors and other ones, like injury to the groin. I've talked to guys who've gotten PFD after a bad stomach bug or straining episode on the toilet or hernia. And one guy even had a really bad relationship issue or a breakup that led to his symptoms. While the causation may be relevant knowledge in addressing symptoms, addressing the sympathetic overdrive is paramount to recovery. Look, the doctor isn't right. It's not all in your head, but they're also not wrong, as there's definitely a psychological/physiological element to your dysfunction. So how do we reduce sympathetic overactivity? Well, two things. First, you've got to change your mindset, and you've got to begin to tip the scales of sympathetic activity with parasympathetic activity. Now, as far as changing your mindset, here's the key takeaway. Understanding the importance of recognizing and intercepting sympathetic activity type thoughts. In other words, you've got to stop dooming. You got to stop doom scrolling, and you have to be able to recognize and call out negative thinking patterns and replace them with positive thinking patterns. When you get thoughts like, I'm always going to be like this, it's always going to get worse, I'll never recover, you're literally putting your body into fight or flight mode. Fight or flight kicks in when we perceive a threat. It's the body's response to a threat. So when you're spending all of your time dooming about your future, spending all day scrolling those subreddits, reading story after story about guys who never recover, you're literally keeping your body in a sympathetic state. You're making it worse. You've got three choices. You can either live in the past, which you can't control. You can live in the future, which you also can't control. Or you can live in the present, where you have a lot more control than either the past or the future. This is referred to as practicing mindfulness, being present in the moment. And it takes some practice to get. You've got to take control of your life and your health in the moment, taking actionable steps. And the more you practice, the better you get at them. And by the way, practicing mindfulness also helps with more than just PFD. It helps with any health condition or any stressful or challenging situation. Now let's talk about specific things that you can do to increase your parasympathetic activity or activity that promote rest and digest. We're going to run through these really fast, and I'll link the scientific literature that really supports their use in the pinned comments. Honestly, each of these techniques are worth a separate video, which I'll probably do in the future. But for now, there are plenty of YouTube videos out there on these topics, so feel free to begin researching on your own. But let's run through these really quick. Box breathing. Box breathing is clinically proven to reduce sympathetic tone and promote parasympathetic tone. It's arguably one of the most effective methods that I have in my toolbox for combating when my anxiety is just a little bit too high. And when it's done properly, you can actually instantly notice a decrease of your heart rate. If you have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch and you can check your heart rate before doing this and then immediately thereafter, you may notice it goes down 10, 15 beats per minute, especially if you're anxious. The method of box breathing is you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it at the top for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds, and then you hold it after the out breath for another 4 seconds before taking a normal breath. Now, a couple rules to follow when doing box breathing. You want to breathe in through your nose and out through pursed lips to control the rate of how long it takes for your breath to come out. Now, the purpose of this exercise is not necessarily diaphragmatic breathing. That's a separate one. It's really more controlling your breathing so that you can reduce your heart rate. And I actually prefer a modified version of this exercise called modified box breathing, where you add basically 1 or 2 seconds to each of those corners. So instead of 4, 4, 4, 4, you breathe in for 4, hold for 6, breathe out for 8, and then hold at the bottom for 10. That last one can be a little bit tricky, especially if you're not great at holding your breath. But with practice, what you'll find is that over time, you can add seconds to each of those steps and increase and increase. Before you know it, you might even just be taking 1 breath per minute. And it has a profound effect, a profound calming effect on your nervous system when doing it. So if you haven't tried box breathing yet, go ahead and pause this video and give it a shot and let me know in the comments what you think about it. Diaphragmatic breathing. Diaphragmatic breathing is clinically proven also to reduce anxiety and physiological arousal. Diaphragmatic breathing has many benefits, and what you'll find in my next video covering tenet number 2, it's actually a key element in the neuromuscular reeducation portion of recovery, where you're learning to expand your breath 360 degrees into your abdomen, down into your pelvis, lengthening the muscles and reducing nerve compression. However, in and of itself, diaphragmatic breathing is an effective way to reduce your anxiety. Let's talk about meditation. Now, there's many different forms of meditation, which time does not allow me to go into each one, but I'm going to share with you my personal favorite. My personal favorite is NSDR, which stands for Non-Sleep Deep Rest Protocol. Now, NSDR is a scientifically adopted name that was taken from the ancient practice of Yoga Nidra. Yoga Nidra has been around for thousands of years. It dates all the way back to the 6th century or probably even earlier. And basically what Yoga Nidra or NSDR is guided meditation. You start off in a seated or laying, any comfortable position, and you close your eyes and you breathe deeply, and then you start scanning individual body parts, often starting with the head or with the feet, and then you systematically go through each body part, consciously relaxing it. It's a really simple but really effective tool to physically reduce symptoms of anxiety. And this is clinically backed up by science. And so if you haven't tried NSDR, I recommend you give it a shot. And finally, let's talk about psychotherapy. Now, I know what you're going to say. Keith, I'm not crazy. I don't need psychotherapy. I've got pelvic floor dysfunction, not mental issues. And I get it. And I'm not saying that you're crazy either. But if you struggle with runaway thoughts, ruminating about your symptoms, dooming about the future, if you find yourself constantly checking your symptoms, you need some tools to tackle these problems, as they are preventing and slowing your recovery. And therapy is another scientifically proven tool to do that. And I'd go so far to say as there isn't a human being in the world who would not benefit from some form of therapy. Now, there's obviously many different types of therapy, but I want to discuss 2 methods of therapy that are again proven to reduce sympathetic activity. The first is cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, this is clinically proven to reduce sympathetic activity, improve heart rate variability, and reduce symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome and IBD. The second is pain reprocessing therapy. This is also proven to reduce pain in over 60% of patients versus placebo. So if you haven't tried therapy yet, I'd encourage you to check these 2 out. So in summary, the human body is very complex. The mind-body connection is a powerful one, and your mental state of mind and your thought life can have a profound impact on your health, your muscle tone, and your nerve function. Psychological elements can play a huge role in causing or exacerbating your symptoms. Anxiety may or may not be the cause of your symptoms, but the presence of anxiety is certainly a driving factor of keeping you stuck with your symptoms. Reducing sympathetic activity and promoting parasympathetic activity is all about input-output. The more you tip the scales towards parasympathetic activity, the less sympathetic activity you'll have and the more relaxed you'll be. Now, am I saying if you fix your anxiety, do a little bit of breath work and meditation, you'll suddenly be cured? Absolutely not. Am I saying if you have underlying and recurrent anxiety that will slow or prevent your recovery? I absolutely am. So let me ask you something. What have you got to lose? Practicing breathing techniques, meditation, mindfulness, talking to someone about your troubles through various forms of therapy are about as low risk as you can get. So if you find that your anxiety is making your symptoms worse, give these things a fair shot. Hey, I hope you found this video empowering. I've linked the studies in the pinned comment. As always, if you found it helpful, please consider hitting like, subscribe, leave a comment. As you know, these types of interactions on YouTube help others see this information, and you never know whom this content can help. In my next video, we're going to talk about the neuromuscular component of recovery, so keep an eye out for that. You don't want to miss it. Until then, my name's Keith, and this is the Unbroken Pelvis channel. I'll see you soon. Stay strong and keep it loose.